Okay, so welcome to the Zoom call for Module 10 and welcome to the new members. I want to make some announcements and then I'll talk a little bit about the session and we'll take it and I'll take your questions. I didn't get any questions from the rest of the members who are not here today. I assume that the 4th of July week holiday really made it harder for people to listen to the session or the lesson. So that would be my guess. Anyway, for the announcements, I want to tell you that the Module 10 office hour will be on Wednesday, July 14th at 7 p.m. I do not record those. I am thinking for September to ask you, I'm going to send an email asking to everyone, would you prefer the Zoom calls to be taking place on the second Wednesday of each month at 7 p.m. Central? Or would you want me to continue to have them on Fridays at 11 a.m.? Because I could flip it. So I have the Friday, the first Friday of the month is the Zoom call, and the second Wednesday of the month is the office hour, but I can flip it. So I'm going to send the survey out. And then all I'm going to want you to do is reply Wednesday at 7 or Friday at 11 for the Zoom call. So just ask me, and then I'll go with the majority. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Monica, for your note. I will try to get to this as quickly as I can. I would encourage you all to listen to the lesson of Module 10 because it has interventions for emotional regulation for couples and for the therapist. The therapist gets easily dysregulated. The work with couples is notorious for getting couples therapists to get emotionally dysregulated. We lose creativity, we lose focus, we lose clinical self-esteem, we lose empathy, we don't know what to do. It's just a myriad of emotionally dysregulated states. We get into adversarial states instead of collaborative states. So I have in the lesson, there are some things some interventions that would be helpful for your own emotional regulation when you get triggered by the couples that you work with. And by triggered, I mean everything I just said: loss of creativity, loss of focus, loss of clinical self-esteem. Last reminder is the implementation ideas are always on the PDF. They're always at the end of the PDF. Even if you don't do any of my ideas, just read them because they might inspire you to think about some cases differently, or they might inspire you to do something. Okay, so let's go on to the session and ask you if you have any questions. And I have some comments, but I'm going to ask you first for questions since there are some people who need to leave early. So Monica, you want to go first with your question, if you have any questions or comments about the module?
Yeah, I think the thing that most caught my attention about it was the way that this couple came to you with a pretty specific problem, and I think it's just a real skill or art to be able to pay attention to the dynamic of how they are engaging in therapy and to bring that to light, and to recognize that even though that is not the thing that they named they need to work on, if they worked on that would most likely be helping to solve the problem that they did bring. So just the discussion about the fact that they didn't know what to talk about, and the fact that there was anxiety about if they were different than one another, then they weren't on the same team, kind of thing. Like, and so I guess it's mostly a comment, just that I really appreciate that, and it's very helpful to, like, I think it's very skillful to balance the content with the process. and noting that the process that they're in is in a lot of ways the most important content. So was just really observing how that was the case in this session, and it just caused me to kind of be thinking through several of the couples that I have. And for some, it seems to more obviously apply than others. But I just really appreciated that. And I don't know that I have a very specific, or maybe the question is, are there times when that is you're less able to let the process guide the conversation as much as content?
Great. I'm going to make some comments, but I want to hear other questions. I usually collect the questions first, and then I make comments. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
I do. First of all, I completely echo what Monica said. Especially since this was the first time I'd listened to one of your sessions, I was really intrigued by what I would say seemed to be really digging deep into, it was almost like it was relentless, which sounds negative, and it was very positive, but I can honestly say I've never really been so, focused on as the therapist on one particular, I guess what would seem to be a sort of a minuscule issue, which obviously wasn't. So that was impressive. The one question I had though, I have a few, but one of them is I have to, full disclosure, I did miss the last 5, maybe 7 minutes of their session. I listened to it in bits and pieces, but I did listen to your lesson, and I read the PDF, et cetera, but so maybe this was more revealing at the end, but I was wondering why you chose this couple for this topic. Because when you talk a lot about lower brain and higher brain, I actually use that a lot in my counseling, mostly because I'm trained as a trauma therapist, and that's so present in working with trauma. It's such a...
Okay, so let me interrupt and answer right off the bat that the lessons and the sessions are not always related. So,
okay.
Right. So I'm sorry to have forgotten or maybe overlooked to mention that in the beginning as I welcome the new members. But I do want to say that anxiety about difference is a form of lower brain. So lower brain doesn't happen only to people who are dysregulated actively. They can be dysregulated not actively. So somebody who withdraws, somebody who says, I don't have anything to talk about because they are anxious about it, that is a form of lower brain. It's a disengagement. So withdrawal is a form of lower brain too. So I can talk more about that. I'm sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to make the clarification.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. And yeah, I mean, I think I conceptualize that more with kind of a freeze when I think of it, fight, flight, or freeze, lower brain, higher brain, but that's a good point. So that was really my question. So
yeah, okay. Do you have any others?
I do, and I don't want to take up too much of the floor time, but I was intrigued, and I can't remember, and I apologize, I made notes as I was listening to the session, so they're not in any particular order. I mean, they are, but they may not seem like it. When you asked what, I can't remember exactly what your wording was, but something to the effect of, what do you want to get out of this session? Is that done more as when you've seen them often? Because I feel like things happen, at least, especially in the first few sessions, of getting to know them better. I typically I'm not a Gottman. I mean, I'm a Gottman level 1 trained therapist, but I use very, very little Gottman, except I do use their assessment. The couple assessment that's like 500 questions long, and that helps me with the first several sessions because there's so much meat there. Maybe I should, well, probably I should start most sessions with what do you want to get out of the session? But so much happens organically, even just from saying, how are you? How was your week? Or how was your couple of weeks? Stuff kind of flows. So is it in your experience, in your opinion, better to really zero in on that from the get-go?
Great question. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Good questions. Linda, I'm going to go with you next. Do you have any questions? Were you able to listen to the audio of the session?
I don't have any questions, and I did not have a chance to listen to the audio.
Okay, no problem. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Many people come to these meetings without having listened to it. Don't worry.
Okay, thanks.
Let's make it easy. No anxiety. If you want the camera on, great. If you don't want it on, great. Whatever you want to do is fine.
Okay,
No
thanks.
judgments. Ruby or Stephanie, any questions?
No, I think mine was actually kind of related to what Jennifer asked, like if it was related, but after you defined it about the lower brain and anxiety, it makes sense now. So that's pretty much what I had. Thank you.
Thank you. How about you, Stephanie?
I didn't have any questions. I mean, something might come up, and I do resonate with what Monica said, because the thing that's always intriguing for me is the process as opposed to the content. That I feel it's where I get lost as a couples therapist, but it's also where I get found as a therapist, if I can go back to what's in play in the triad as well as between the two people. That's where a lot of really good meaty questions come out. And I think that this thing, I've listened to about almost all of it. That was where the meat seemed to be in this particular segment that you recorded for us. Is like, this is what it looks like when you go at the process. And I really appreciate that.
Right. So to try to answer Monica's and maybe Jennifer's question, which seem a little related, is that just to give you a little background, this couple, I think I had been working with them for months, like maybe three or 4 months. And they brought that was their presenting issue, that they were not having sex and that they wanted to. And that was the first and only time they brought it up in the first appointment. That was one thing that I wanted to tell you. The second thing is that they, so this is related to Jennifer's question. So yes, I do ask, and I'll say more about that, but I'll say for now, I do ask, what do you want to get out of this session? Probably not in the first 3 or 4, but after that I do, because I do a lot of preparation for the work. So more than a formal assessment, I do a lot of preparation for the couples therapy work. And I'll say a little more about what that means before I start. And one of the things I prepare them for is to say, we're going to be identifying what you want to talk about each time you come. And so that this will be related to your vision of what a good relationship or a collaborative relationship or a better relationship looks like for you. So when you come, I'm going to ask you, it's a way of grounding them too. I'm going to ask you your intention. So I tell them that I'm going to do that. So that's what I do. I'm trying to think if I do it in the first 3 to 5. I think I don't. Because I'm more of a leader. I drive the conversation about what I want to know. I don't do a formal assessment, but I do a treatment plan in the first 3 to 5, and that includes telling them that I'm going to ask them what they want to talk about. And so, maybe in some cases I'm less clear with clients than I have been just now when I was telling you about it. But in any event, what I do is I ask them, and if they say I don't have any agenda, we haven't thought about it, I might say, take a few minutes and think about it now, and then be silent. I might say, what's been on your mind that you haven't shared with each other or even with yourself, that you think might be useful, that to get you in the direction you want to go. So I always link it to their stated goal and to their stated vision of what they want. And then I stay silent. And when I don't do that, then I start talking myself. Well, here's what I think we could do, or here's, and I do a little bit of that in this session. I think I talk too much. And I think what happened to me is that I actually got frustrated by the fact that yet again, they're telling me they don't know what they want to talk about. This was the 10th time it happened, or 15 times it happened. And so I think part of my relentlessness is that I was frustrated, and I'm like, this is the last time this happens, and I don't want this to happen anymore. And and I was trying to be, I wanted to tease it out. How is this going to work? What's happening? And I get to the differentiation issue and to the anxiety issue and to why they were. I was trying to get to, are you expecting this to come from me? I know I've said to you what we could talk about, but is that your expectation, or are you know what? I just trying to figure out the meaning of that was the whole beginning. So I think I'm trying to answer the question. Do I apply, Monica, your question, do I apply the process questions always? I think so, but the, let's see how I can answer that. This is a very, very conflict avoidant couple. So as opposed to a high conflict couple, these guys are both conflict avoiders. They get, you heard me explain to her, well, she says, I don't want to hurt him. Well, it's a differentiation problem. It's not so much that you don't want, it's not only that you don't want to hurt him, but what triggers that not wanting to hurt him in you is the fact that you may have a different opinion about, you're not sure whether what you want to talk about is the same thing he wants to talk about, and that makes you very uncomfortable. So, so this is an unusually high level of well, maybe not so unusual. It's fairly common to have a high level of conflict avoidance. And actually, conflict avoidance is known to deaden sexual desire. There is a correlation between the deadening of sexual desire in one or both members of the couple and the severe conflict avoidance. And the reason being that conflict, difference, dealing with differences, dealing with conflict, dealing with disagreements in an honest way makes it for a more authentic relationship. So I don't have the research at the tip of my finger to be able to cite the research backing up what I'm saying. But if you think about it, it might make some sense to you. And let me know if you have any questions about what I'm saying. How is it that conflict avoidance is connected to a deadening of sexual desire for your partner? You may, I mean, the opposite is actually also true. In high conflict couples, it's not unusual to hear that they reconnect through sex, that they, after they have a fight, they have the best sex they ever had. In part, it's the the conflict avoidance saps the energy of the relationship. And this is why this is such a widespread problem nowadays. You see couples who come to us, they are wonderful, but they're roommates. They don't have any sex and they haven't had sex for years. Okay, I'm going to stop here and see if you have any other comments based on what I'm saying or questions.
So when you mentioned the conflict avoidance and if it makes sense, so to me, it seems that that would be a common thing. And only because you're avoiding the conflict, you're avoiding the person, and that person already knows that you're being avoided to address something that's important. So it's like, well, I'm not even going to try to give you a hug because you're already avoiding me. So is that how it kind of plays out with the conflict avoidance and the lessened sexual desire?
That could be a good example.
Okay.
Yes. It's not the only one, but that's a great example.
In my experience, well, I shouldn't even give a percentage to it because I don't know the exact percentage, but there is a high percentage of couples I see who say that that's a presenting issue. I mean, unless there's infidelity, something, some big elephant, or maybe not even elephant, but one big, trauma, if you will. I would say that's the majority of my clients is we feel like roommates, and even if they have sex, I've had couples who haven't had sex in 4, 5, 6, 9 years. But even those that have it more frequently, but still somewhat infrequently, they'll say the same thing, right? We don't have the desire, and we're roommates. We love each other, and we're here because we want to see if we can reinstill that desire. So, but I hear what you're saying about the conflict avoidance, and I'm completely had an epiphany when you said that. That makes so much sense. But by the same token, sometimes I will have even a slightly pursue or distancer relationship where that's the same issue, right? Is that they just are lacking desire. So maybe that's a whole other lesson. I don't know, but I wanted to sort of ask if maybe that's other, I don't know if there's a question in there. I just wanted to kind of comment that I see that as probably the single biggest presenting issue with couples.
Yes, it is. Thank you for that comment. Great questions, all of you, by the way. Always. Any other comments, or should I go to try to talk about what Jennifer is talking about? Okay.
Yeah, I have a comment, but it's a little bit on a different path, so we can.
Okay. So let me say that it is one of the most common presenting issues, and it is one of the hardest things to change clinically. And so that's the other thing I wanted them to go back to it, right? I wanted them to talk more about that and to the ways in which that was affecting each of them. In fact, I want to tell you that this is like now a year later, I'm still working with them. They're working on trying to open up the marriage. They're exploring whether or not. So this is one thing I wanted to tell you in answer to your question. So, or your comment. So I talk a lot to couples about the extent to which a contemporary adult intimate relationship is many things. It's a business partnership. It's an emotional partnership. It's a sexual partnership. If you've been with me or you've been my students for a long time, you've heard me say this before. And that it is kind of hard to think of all of them functioning well. A friendship partnership, a parenting partnership. And so, we put all our eggs in one basket and we expect everybody to, we expect the relationships to function well at all levels. So with this couple, this session that you heard was transformative. They never came back with saying, I don't have an agenda anymore. So, and this led us to explore what they mean by a collaborative relationship, what they mean by a marriage. Does it mean if they don't have sex that they have to get divorced? Does it mean if the rest of the relationship works? So my idea is that nowadays we need to be able to tease out the cultural beliefs underlying relationship distress and their gender role scripts underlying relationship distress. So with him, an obvious place to go is to ask him, based on today on the session that you heard, do you want to have sex with her because this is what a married man is supposed to do? And you would feel less of a man. Let me just, I'm not sure if I would ask him that way, but this is the idea behind what I would want to explore with him, and I have. Do you want to have sex with her because this is what a married man is supposed to do, or because this is what you want to do? Right? And it's hard to tease these things out. And so once you begin to, and to her, the same thing. Do you want to have sex because you want to have sex with him? Or because you think you ought to have sex with him? So there's a lot of duty, and there's a lot of duty and obligation and all of that in many women. So, so when you begin to tease out these things and you combine this, both the cultural beliefs and the gender role scripts about what's behind their wishes, and you can begin to talk about the different levels of the relationship and what would happen if this never gets fixed. So this is where we were at. This is where we're at. She's realizing this may never get fixed. I may never, she's like in private sessions with me, she said she's disgusted by him. Now that one is very, very difficult to change. And some of it may be all of these differentiation issues, but some of it may be, it's not gonna, it's just not gonna happen. And so how does she talk about it with him? What if I can never? What if I don't? What if I don't want to? She doesn't have to tell him she's disgusted, because that would not be nice, but she can say, what if I can never get myself there? What if I never do? What if I never want to? What if I want somebody else? What if I don't want with you, but I want with somebody else? So this is where we're at. And it took about, I don't remember now, but 6-8 months to try to talk about this now. And so I have actually several couples where once you get over the idea that you can't talk about things because they're taboo, because they give you anxiety, because you don't know what the other partner is going to, once you realize everybody has to figure out their own scripts for their own relationship. I have several couples in my practice right now that are deciding not to have sex and stay together. Is it a shame to not have sex and stay together? Nowadays, it's more of a shame to not have sex and stay together than to get divorced, as Esther Perel says. It's more of a shame to stay with somebody that you're not attracted to sexually. But what if you're 55, 60 years old? Do you want to rekindle that in yourself and tease out, do you want that for yourself, separated from having, do you want sex for yourself because you miss it, because you want it? Are there other ways you can get some of that? I mean, there's a lot of things you can talk about with somebody if you can help them see there are no rules. There are no more. What is it terrible to stay married for the sake of the children? I don't think so. I think that might be a great idea, depending on whether you kill each other or not when you're around. So let me see if there's anything else I want to tell you. Did I answer your question, Jennifer?
Yes, very much. Thank you.
And so Monica, you wanted to make a comment. I want to make sure you'd have a chance to do that.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Esther Perel, because this past week I have a couple that originally came to me. Their kind of presenting reason for coming is that they're thinking about opening up the marriage, and so we began to talk about that, and I was just sort of asking questions and getting a sense of where they were and whatnot. And after we've had four joint sessions, and then I've met with each of them individually once. So it's not that long, but we've begun to get into this discussion of like, there are actually some issues in their own sex life and then their relationship, and talking about that, and the wife not really wanting to have sex and the husband wanting it more than they have it, and the wife being worried that that's why he wants to open up the marriage and she doesn't really want to, and also all these dynamics. And so I was beginning to go down the path, and of like, well, what about their family of origin? And the wife had talked about how she comes from a family with absolutely no boundaries and everyone's highly reactive, and he's of course the opposite, and she feels bad about that. And so I was kind of trying to pay attention to the dynamics and the process more of like what's happening in the relationship that might be the cause of this. And then the husband said, which kind of surprised me on a couple of different levels. Like, I was listening to Esther Perel, and she says that if you can try to fix the problem by fixing what's happening in the relationship, or you could, if you just fix the problem in the bedroom, if you start having sex, that might fix the other problem. And I said, yes, that is true, but it took me so off track because it wasn't where I was going or thinking. But I said, so then I was kind of on the fly, and I said, yeah. I said, so one way to do that might be to schedule sex, which makes it a more neutral thing. Like, because he always tries to initiate and she'll always say no. And then at some point she'll say yes. And so he feels like he has no control. So I was saying, yeah, you could try that. If you both agree, you can schedule sex. And he was like, I just think it should be spontaneous and, all that kind of stuff. And I said, yeah, but I think it's not always spontaneous. We went through all that. But I think for me, just the idea of I think I was on the road of trying to look at their process and how it was affecting their dynamic and their sex life. And then for the client actually to pull out Esther Perel and say, well, she says this, and it's more of a behavioral thing, that I was like, just sort of a little bit stunted in what I was doing.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. It's it makes me it reminds me of the following. So it used to be that the psychoanalysts would not refer to sex therapists because they said, if you fix the way they fix the process, you're going to have more sex. And it didn't turn out that way. It turns out that even when they relate better to each other, when they're not, when they dialogue better, when they curb their reactivity, when they understand the impact of the behavior of one on the other, when they understand, whatever, even when the relationship gets better, sex is not getting better. And so in part because couples have false beliefs about what it takes, in part because they need help, they need behavioral help to take small steps, and they need to buy your interventions that sex needs to be scheduled. I'm all for scheduling sex, but I can't tell you how many people tell me, no, that's ridiculous, I'm never going to do that. So I have to ease into that to try to help them understand that even when you first met, if the romantic stage was good and sex was hot and good, you did schedule it. You showered, you went to dinner, you thought about it, you got dressed, you had a date. I mean, it's not true that people don't schedule it and it's spontaneous. I mean, that's a total myth. And it's a Hollywood myth. It's a myth related to what you see in the movies. It doesn't make any sense. So anyway, so part of it is that when you can work with couples on their beliefs, on the barriers for implementation, on the anxieties they have, you know, if they've been rejected many times, there's how are they ever going to go back to requesting it, and what happens with a person who doesn't initiate and who initiates, and how do you let your partner know that you're aroused, and how do you turn it down without never offering something in return. So it's a wonderful arena on which to discuss the different alternatives for collaborating. So that's just one thing I wanted to say. Do you see what I'm saying when I say it this way?
Mhm.
Like, how do you let her know that you're aroused? How do you communicate with her that you're aroused? Because a big piece of this is that people don't think they need to talk about this. That this is something that happens naturally, and they don't ever need to talk about what they want, talk about arouses them, talk about whether or not they masturbate, talk about whether or not they have fantasies, they have to talk about these things. Do it this way, no that way. Now so there's a toggling between the process of how to collaborate on discussing this and how to actually do it. And so, but I think couples need some help in how to get there behaviorally. I don't disagree with that. The other thing I wanted to mention about lack of sexual desire, lack of sex between people who've been together for a while, is that there's a relationship between lack of sex and physical affection. So people also have some confusion about what that means. If the lower desire person doesn't know that the difference between, if the lower desire person doesn't know what the higher desire person wants, does the higher desire person want physical affection and touch, or does the higher desire person want to go all the way to have sexual intercourse? When the lower desire person doesn't know the answer to that question, they tend to reject a lot more than if they did know the answer to that question. And so, you know, you got to teach the lower desire person to ask the higher desire person, what do you want? What are you in the mood for? What are you thinking of? And you also want to teach the higher desire person to say, I just want to hug, I just want to cuddle, I just want to do this, I just want to do that. There's so much to, I mean, I knew we would get into the subject of sex. There's so much to talk about. So because of that, I want to give you some resources. So I am referring to the Esther Perel talk in the session, which is one of her TED Talks, The Secret of Desire in a Long-Term Committed Relationship, or something like that. She has two wonderful TED Talks. One is on that and the other one is on infidelity. The second thing I mentioned is a book by Barry McCarthy called Rekindling Desire. I think it's an excellent book to try to help couples to think of their sexual desire discrepancy when there's a higher desire person and a lower desire person, which is different than a no sex person when they're both on lower desire. But this is a couple with a discrepant desire. So the book is really good at helping couples therapists not help the clients navigate it and to see it as a couples issue, not as a lower desire person issue, if that makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. It's not the lower desire person issue, which is the way it used to be dealt with 30, 40 years ago, but we don't think about that anymore. We think of it as a couple issue. The sexual desire discrepancy is no different than any other disagreement on how to spend weekends, on when, or the tolerance for cleanliness or disorder. I mean, that's why I said it's a wonderful arena on which to explore differentiation, collaboration, and negotiation. And then another resource is a book called Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski that some of you may be familiar with, that discusses spontaneous desire versus responsive desire, and the concepts of brakes and accelerators. It's wonderful for the lower desire person, and for the higher desire person too. And then there's another book by Alexandra Solomon, who just published a book last year called Taking Sexy Back. So I think Ruby has to go. Bye, Ruby. And Monica, you'll have to go.
Bye,
soon.
thank you.
Oh, bye.
Yeah.
So Taking Sexy Back is the last book I want to recommend by Alexandra Solomon, that I think is a wonderful book for, well, for the title, you know, for somebody who's in a lower desire. So let's see if there's something I want to tell you. You know, I often think about the things I don't do in the session. So for some of you who are new, my sessions are what I have been able to get people to authorize, right? So I have the whole academy has a total of 12 sessions, and it hasn't been easy for me to get permission not only to tape them, but also to use it for educational purposes. So this is, you know, I feel privileged that they let me do that. And so often what I do in these sessions, they are a good reminder for me sometimes of what I could have done that I didn't do. So I was talking a little bit about this in the beginning, like I could have just shut up and said, what do you want to talk about? And I could have just been much more direct about it, and maybe less. I thought I was too wordy. You know, I listened again to it this morning. I'm like, oh, I was cringing. But, you know, that's my general reaction to listening to my own sessions. But I think I could have been a bit more direct and said, well, how about if we make it a rule that that's not possible? And from now on, every time you come, but I think I kind of did that and that didn't work. So I felt like I needed to do a little more maybe. And then the other thing is when I don't know if you remember, but at some point he says, at some point she says, he threatened to blow up this whole thing. If I'm not putting out, so to speak, I will, you know, he will threaten to blow up the whole thing. And I could have asked her, what happens to you when he does that? And I don't think I did. Or how do you lose your center? So, you know, because there was a lot of talk about how he changed from being too reactive when she wanted something different to now being a little bit better, but he's still reactive. And so, you know, what happens to her is she loses her center and she loses her ground when he threatens. And instead of saying, well, that may be what you want, but that's not what I want. Thank you for letting me know what you want, but I wouldn't want that. So part of the work is on helping her not only be less reactive to his reactivity, but also not lose her ground. And again, to be able to say, well, thank you for telling me what you want, but I wouldn't want to blow everything up. I would want to have a good parenting agreement. I would want to have a good thing. I would want this, I would want that. And then I would want to ask him, when you hear her say, which is, it's kind of the work we're doing now, as I say, when you hear her say, what do you want to, you know, that she may never get to it, that she may not want to have sex with him ever. What does that do to him? And what does he want? How does he want to respond instead of what he would have responded, let's say 5 months ago or a year ago? Anyway, so those are just a couple of thoughts I had. Do you want me to keep talking a bit about the difference between physical affection and sex and other issues to deal with low sexual desire discrepancy, or do you have any other comments or questions?
I have a question that's probably germane to a lot of the other types of issues that couples have, but that you've mentioned, and you mentioned it in the session as well. It's like, it sounds like you're meeting with them as a couple, but you've met with each of them individually off and on as well. And how do you decide when that's important? I mean, I do that, generally tend to do that in the very beginning, but it sounds like you made some kind of it sounds like you felt it was important to meet with them individually more, as if you were having like an individual, one-on-one relationship with each of the clients as opposed to just a couple. So I was wondering about that.
Yeah, there's a note that came in. Linda wants to hear more about, oh, I lost it. About sexuality, desire differences. Okay, let me see what else I can do. But let me try to answer your question, Stephanie.
Mm-hmm.
So I meet with them individually a lot. Well, not a lot, but often. And in this case, let's say after advancing an issue, in this case, I wanted to meet with them individually because because there's a difference between privacy and secrecy. And so understanding what's happening to her when he advances, I wanted to have that conversation without him.
Mm-hmm.
When he advances sexually and she doesn't want to, and she recoils, she did use the word recoil,
Mm-hmm.
but she hadn't used the word disgusted like she used with me in the individual session.
Mm-hmm.
So when I suspect that there are things that are private, that would be one criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Another, it just varies on the case. So another case I'm working with right now, they made enormous progress in a year. And then they said, we want to work on our sex, we haven't had sex in a year and a half. We want to work on that. And so that was a little bit of a change of a topic. So I felt like we wanted to meet individually. Because I didn't want to start on that topic unless I knew exactly what each of them had in mind. Okay. Another example is trauma, let's say, speaking about trauma. I think that I think that couples are triggered by each other's presence in many situations. Mm-hmm. And so meeting alone with me, I think you're right, Stephanie, that is a way to increase my therapeutic alliance. But in addition to that, I do it because because they're not triggered with me. They're triggered by their partner, but not by me. If I can get it right, who knows? If I have a good therapeutic alliance. So, and so to work on the trauma, here's a very interesting piece. So when people have developmental trauma or early relational trauma, and all developmental trauma is relational, when they have that, there are still relationship issues that need to be dealt with. But I'm not going to be able to get there unless I can get to the developmental trauma. So I need to know. I'm going to be very, very general here because I want to make sure that I get back to the question of that Linda is asking. And Linda, as I talk, if you can specify a more specific question, that would be very helpful to me. So just to finish up the issue of the trauma, very often couples are working with individual therapists, and I want to hear, I have to be in close contact with them because I need to hear what they're dealing with. And I need to know what kind of work they're doing. Not to mention that very often they're not doing good work, and I want to be able to evaluate that.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Sarah, but do you mean you want to work with the individual about what they're working with individually or working on, or you want to meet with the individual therapist?
Well, I want to have I always want to have conversations with the individual therapist, so that informs my work with the couple, but I'm also informing the individual therapist of how the individual gets triggered, which the individual therapist may not know about. So it's a two-way process, it's a two-way collaborative process. But I'm also evaluating what the therapist is doing in there and what the client is doing in there, just to see if I think they're doing good work. So as I get to know the individuals better within the couple relationship, because I think we need to do both intrapsychic and interpersonal. There are interpersonal issues that are stemming from the intrapsychic. And so once I know the themes, the trauma positions, it's not, in my view, it's not so much what happened to the client, but how the client developed strategies to survive. So what were the coping mechanisms? What are the defense mechanisms? What are the issues that they have done? Because those are the issues that, generally, we pick a partner, those people, well, I'm not going to say that's a terrible sentence. The people who have developmental trauma often pick a partner that is exactly from whom they want the healing to happen. And when it doesn't happen, it triggers the same thing that they were triggered to when they were growing up. I know I'm speaking very theoretically, and I'm not going to have time to expand on this issue today, but in the work with trauma, with people who have undergone trauma, we need to be able to help them to connect the dots, because they get triggered by their partners in the same way they were triggered by their uncle, their father, their mother, their sibling. And so you want to connect those dots. And I don't know if I don't even remember the original question or comment anymore. Oh, individual. We're talking about individual, right? How to do individual. So I need to know how the clients understand what happened to them and what survival strategies they developed. And oftentimes that conversation, I need to have it with them individually.
That's I like that.
Yeah. Okay. Add more to my discussion about sexual desire differences. Okay. So thank you for the question. I was talking about discrepant sexual desire as if it were any other difference. And I'm wondering if it would be helpful for me to to talk a bit about how I talk with each of them, because they're different issues. Like, I think I was giving you some examples earlier that to the higher desire person, it's important to tease out cultural and gender role scripts, beliefs about that. That's just one thing. So the other thing I haven't mentioned yet that I think might be helpful for you to know is that very often people have an idea that the be all and they equate sex and sexual intimacy with penetration. This is for heterosexual couples. And for same-sex couples, if it's two women, it could be they equate sex with orgasm, meaning with the final step. And so one thing I say is that they're different, and then we talk about the differences. What are the differences between penetration and other sexual behaviors? I just had another thought and I lost it. So as I was saying earlier, I talk a lot about touch and touch deprivation, and that and I make a connection between how they differ and how they are the same, sexual touch from sexuality. And and then I talk about non-sexual touch and the difference between non-sexual touch and sexual touch. And that very often couples who are not having sex because they're not having penetrative sex, they also stop having touch. And they don't touch each other anymore. And that leads to touch deprivation. And I use the word touch deprivation on purpose because we know it's a problem for the elderly, and we know it's a problem for infants. But we never talk about touch deprivation for a regular normal adult. Mm-hmm. But regular normal adults want touch too. And this is one of the reasons why the pandemic was really, really hard, because people stopped being able to hug with their relatives and their grandchildren and their friends and their, especially if they lived alone and didn't have a partner. So many people were suffering from touch deprivation. And okay, so that's just another thing I wanted to talk about, the difference between touch and sex, and that you can help couples restore touch even though on the way to restore sex. First of all, because you don't know if you're going to be able to restore sex, but at least you can restore touch. So touch should be non-threatening, obviously, should be this is where the dialogue comes in. The person should know what the other one wants. I just want to hug. I just want to touch you. I just want to do that. And when people haven't touched each other for a long time, you could do touching exercises in a session. You can have one person touch the other person's face. You can have the person touch the other person's hair. You can have, you can have them hug for 30 seconds in front of you. Sometimes I leave the room. Sometimes they do hug in front of me. There's an exercise called Hugging Till Relaxed. You can Google it, and it's really, really wonderful. And you can do that in the session. Actually, in this month lesson, there are co-regulation techniques that include some of self-soothing and soothing of the other that involve touch. So you may want to look at that for that reason. Anyway, I want to move on to another issue when it comes to sexual desire discrepancy, which is about the myth that all sex is reciprocal. So, and this will clarify a little bit more what I mean by this is an arena where differentiation can be dealt with so beautifully. So I think there is the belief, false, that when you are feeling like anything, whether it's touch, sex, whatever, that the other person should feel the same. Or the expectation that if you want to have sex, if you're aroused, which is why I have a lot of conversations about arousal. What arouses you? Tell me the last time you were aroused. Well, and those are private conversations, by the way, for example. Some things can be shared. When I see a handsome guy in the street, I get aroused. When I see a woman with big boobs on the street, I get aroused. I mean, those need to be private. But you do want to get at what arouses you. What is a killer of arousal? What arouses you? So that you can help them discriminate between what they can share with their partners and what they cannot share with their partners. So, and sometimes they think they can't share and they're wrong. You know, I think for some people it would be arousing to hear that one of the members of the couple is aroused when they see a woman with big boobs, whether it's a woman or a man. I mean, many women are aroused by women. Many men are aroused by other men. I mean, right. So you need to know certain things about arousal in order to ask good questions about arousal. You need to know questions about arousal and fantasy life and masturbation, and you need to be comfortable yourself in talking about sex. That's the first thing I should say. But then once you get to the arousal, then you can get at the underlying belief that all arousal is reciprocal. That when you feel like having sex, your partner will feel like too. And like in so many other things, when you feel like going to the grocery store, your partner may not feel like it. When you feel like cleaning the house, your partner may not feel like it. How do you negotiate? How do you negotiate the lack of reciprocity in a sexual encounter? This is why it's such a good arena to deal with differences, disappointments, disagreements. So let me back up for a second and say, I believe that when you're in a relationship, A, you cannot ignore your own wishes. It's not easy to know what they are, but you ignore your own wishes at your own peril. And B, you cannot ignore the wishes of your partner. Again, if you know what they are. So what you want is to, so speaking about process, this is a process that I get into very, very often. Okay, so you felt like having sex and she rejected. So tell me how you said it. What did you say? When did you know you were aroused? When did you tell her that you wanted to have something going on? How did you tell it to her? And then you go to the partner and say, what did you feel when he said, or when she said, and how did you react and what did you do? And then you get a blow by blow account of how that experience went, and then you provide an alternative. So here's how a conversation could go when things are well, even in a sexual desire discrepancy couple. Hey, how about if after, so this is, I'm saying this is a male partner talking to a female partner. The female partner is the one with the lower sexual desire. Hey, how about if after the movie we go back to bed? And she'll look at him and she'll say, oh, it will be 10 o'clock by then. I'm going to be very tired. How about a rain check? And I'll give you, I'll do, well, two things, I'm just playing out certain scenarios here based on what I've heard from other couples and from what I do based on what they tell me. Do you want a full-blown, or do you just want to do a quickie? What would you want? Oh, I just want a quick. We haven't had sex in a week and I'm really feeling like I need to, I want to, okay, great. How about if we turn off the TV and go to the bedroom now? Because I don't want to be, I want to do that, but I don't want to do it too late. Okay, let's go. Or another scenario is that he'll say, how about if after the movie we go back to the bedroom and see what happens, or whatever word they used for sex, and she'll say, no, I'm going to be very tired afterwards. I don't want to do it. But how about if I give you, do you want to, well, she wouldn't be asking, do you want a quickie or not? Because she doesn't want to. So she'll say no, but how about a rain check? And on Friday afternoon, when the kids go to grandma, how about if we make a point to do that? And he'll say, great. And then of course she would have to follow through. So in other words, if he's the one who, again, depending on, I just need to assess what kind of dialogues are they having and what are they not saying? And then construct a possible dialogue that will take into account both of their wishes. Because like in everything else, most couples operate under the if I win, you lose, and if you win, I lose method of relating. Right? Do you know what I'm saying when I say it that way? Okay. So if we have sex when I want to, I win because you don't want to. And we don't have sex because I don't want to, then I win and you lose. Now that is not a collaborative, negotiated relationship. So I wonder if what I said, Linda, was somewhat helpful to the conversation, to what address some of what you were asking. You can put it in the chat, or you can.
It was great. It was great. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to hear that. Any other questions about sexual desire discrepancy, or more about what I said, or anything else?
I do, and then I actually have to leave at about 1:20. But I so often hear that kids get in the way, right? And that was my excuse when I got divorced. And it's legitimate, right? I mean, it's exhausting. They, in this day and age, kids take center stage, and everything's about the kids, and that's when they stopped having sex. And now they get in the way, and now we can't have sex because they're going to, barge in. How do you incorporate that?
Well, that's a great question. There's a lot to talk about that, and I do talk a lot about it. That's another thing I talk about a lot. What interferes? What are the barriers? What are the turnoffs? Children are not only barriers; they're turnoffs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So very often the lower sexual desire person, let me say a couple more things before I address the issues that you're asking. The lower desire person has more power. So if the lower desire person doesn't want to have sex, then sex does not happen. It's the veto power, which is the way that I describe how do you make decisions when you disagree. So I before we tackle the general issue of the sexual desire discrepancy, I help couples come up with a process for making decisions when they disagree. Usually the one who doesn't want something has more power than the one who wants something. And that seems like that's a revelation to some people, and other people say, oh, I never thought about it that way, but it makes sense. So the other thing that happens is, again, continuing with the stereotypical heterosexual couple where the woman has a lower sexual desire and the guy has a higher sexual desire. He also has what's known nowadays as the mental load. If you don't know, so I'm not going to ask you if you know what that means, but I'm just going to define it a little bit. So the mental load in a house, in a nuclear family household with a heterosexual couple, the mental load is more of a burden for women than it is for men. So it's not for younger couples, that is not as much as it is for a little bit older couples, but it still happens. Anyway, but forget about genders and let's just talk in general of what the mental load is. So the mental load is the thinking about what needs to get done that hasn't gotten done. And just for example, in the planning, in the list making. And sex, so in order to have sex, you have to be able to let go of that. And very often the person who has the higher mental load has the lower sexual desire. There's a correlation between a higher mental load and a lower sexual desire. And kids are part of mental load. And so, okay, having said that, the way I talk to people is that I have a very, very clear idea about why couples don't do well. One of them is because they're disconnected emotionally or sexually. That is a big, big reasons for relationship distress. And it is one of the main reasons why couples divorce. It's either they feel emotionally disconnected from their partner or they feel sexually disconnected from their partner. But there is a disconnection. Of course, they're related. Women often say, but sometimes men often say and you know, I've had a lot of men who says, when she mistreats me like this, I don't feel like having sex. So it's not just women. When she talks to me like that, it hurts me, and it's a turnoff. So the emotional disconnection and the sexual connection are completely related. And some people say, I need to feel emotionally connected in order to have sex. And other people say, I will feel emotionally connected after I have sex. So that's another chicken and egg thing that is a non-collaborative approach to solving this discrepancy. Because, so I get it, you know, I need to feel emotionally connected to have sex. That's great. But if your partner tells you that he feels more emotionally connected after, why don't you try that? You know, why does it have to be before? Because this is a win-lose position. It's not a collaborative position. So that's number one. In terms of what to do with the kids, you know, barging in. And the other one is when people are disconnected, well, so with the time that we have left, I'm gonna say this. What I ask is I want to, you know, sometimes I lecture or do a mini lecture or mini thing about helicopter parenting and about, you know, whatever. But sometimes I simply say this. When your children are 25 years old and they are about to choose a mate and they think about your marriage, what would you like them to describe it as? And so, what do you mean? They say, well, your children are 5 and 7 now, but at some point they'll grow up, they'll leave your house and they'll be 25. In addition to telling them when they leave, you'll be strangers to each other, which I do often, which is the reason for the late divorce. I say, what do you want your children to think about? How would you want them to define your relationship when they are 25? What words would you like them to use to describe the way you were? I just asked this question recently to a couple I've been working with for a few months now, who have a myriad of problems. And one of them is they're not having sex right now. There was an infidelity a long time. Anyway, whatever the issue is. I walk them through. We spend a good half hour on that exercise, and they said, I would like them to think of us as good friends. I would like them to have seen, because I not only ask, what do you want them to use to describe the way that you were as a couple when they were growing up? I want them to describe behaviors. I saw them hugging each other. I saw them laughing. I saw them escaping us so that they could go and have coffee or a drink. That's what they said. I saw them, again, laughing. I knew something was happening in the bedroom, but I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was happening. So that's the kind of, so then once you have that vision of what they want their children to think of when they think of themselves, and you can ask each of them to elaborate, what would you be doing? What would you be saying? What would you, what would they remember? Just very specifically, you can say, how far are you from that vision? And when the couple gave me the vision, and I asked them this question, how far are you from that vision? How much of this are you doing now? They said none of it. And when I said, well, how do you think it's going to change then? Is there any chance, if you do none of it, is there any chance that your children will have that memory of you? And of course, the answer is no. So then I say, well, now it's nothing, and 10, now is 0, and 10 is you're having sex. What do you want? So the other thing I say is I often ask, what do you want? To the higher desire person, I say, how many times a week do you want to have sex? There is no normal, there is no better, there is no worse. How many times do you want? Well, once would be nice, says the higher desire person. And I say to the lower desire person, how many, it's amazing how many times they say once would be nice. It's sometimes, of course, one says 5 and the other one says, once a month. That's possible too, but it's not always like that. And so I think I just lost my train of thought. I was saying that, that 1 is nothing, we're not doing anything, and 10 is we're doing all of it. I say, this is a very typical, Stephanie, you won't be surprised. What's a 1 look like? What does a 1 look like in terms of those specific behaviors? Anyway, I hope I answered Jennifer's question about the children with this vision about what they want the children to think of them. So what I usually do is I try to write up the questions that were discussed in during this time so that people can know whether they are interested in join and watching the video, which will be uploaded in the next few minutes, hopefully, if not by tomorrow, on module 10. Any last comments or questions? How did it go, Linda, for you as a new member?
It was really helpful. I appreciate your perspective.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Did I answer some of your questions?
Definitely. Your framework on how you are thinking through some of these things will be really helpful in assessing couples and also in
That's
kind
wonderful.
of guiding them.
So let me make this comment. When new members join and they are exposed to me, unlike my former students who've known me for a while, when new members that I don't know join me in my academy, there's often a lowering of the clinical self-esteem when they first get exposed to me. Stephanie, do you know what I'm talking about?
Talking about me now or when I was one of your students?
When you were, did that ever happen to you that you hear me and you say, oh my God, there's so much I don't know. Oh my
Yes.
God, there's so much I don't know what to do. Or I
Yes.
can't believe I've been doing this for so many years and I still don't know how to do this. So it's sort of this program, and I don't know if it's true of other programs, but I know that this program with the monthly Zoom calls, or when you hear me in a session, or when you hear the lessons, you're like, oh, that it triggers your lower clinical self-esteem. And I just want to tell you that is normal. It happens to everyone. And the more experienced a couples therapist, the more it happens.
Yeah, I would say that I noticed it today mostly because I have 3 couples that are in various stages of what we talked about today. So I thought, oh my God, I've got work to do.
So it happened to you today.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I
Linda,
appreciate-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just appreciated some of the the resources that you provided, because I have a couple couples that I think like might read at least one of these books, and definitely watch the Esther Perel piece. I haven't watched it in a long time, but she's fabulous.
And so Linda, I hope that if that got triggered in you, that you can tolerate the feeling and not get too discouraged or too distressed by it.
I feel like there's a lot I can learn from you. And I appreciate that opportunity. And then I also felt like in some respects, like it affirmed some of the things that I do with couples too. So that was helpful.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so thank you so much, Linda, and everyone else for participating and for your questions and your comments. As always, I feel privileged to be able to guide you in doing this most difficult and most rewarding work.
Thank you.
I'll see you next month.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're
Bye.
welcome.